Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge a couple of themes for Rosh Hashanah that have just been resonating with me these last couple of days, in particular related to what I'm going to be sharing this morning. The first is, acknowledging that God is the Melech, the executive who's in charge of our lives, helping us realize we are not really laws unto ourselves, and that today is Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, with God above us, the independent judiciary to whom we are accountable. I know that, as many of you are aware, there are several Israeli TV shows that have gained immense popularity in recent years. Shtisel and Shtisel fans, Fauda, Srugim, Unorthodox, Queen of Jerusalem, among many others. I know, like I said, that there are many fans out there among you. But the biggest hit inside Israel this past year has not been a TV show, it's been a podcast. A podcast that features two women approaching age 80, acquaintances for over 50 years, just talking about everything but everything that there is to reflect on and discuss in life. The show has immense ratings among both women, not surprisingly, and men, and not only among those around their age who are the founding generation of Israel, but also among the 20 and 30-somethings too, as well as for those in middle age. For example, my wife, Tamara, loves it so much, she listens to each weekly podcast at least twice, often literally laughing out loud, which I hear, sometimes shedding a tear, but always drinking in the life wisdom of these ladies as if they were sages. Dalia Gutman and Nurit Geffen have both been at the center of the Israeli cultural scene since its inception. Gutman is a prolific TV producer, Geffen a producer and TV personality, as well as the ex-wife of one of Israel's most well-known poets and songwriters, Yonatan Geffen, who died this past year. And she's also the mother of iconic Israeli rock star Aviv Geffen and of Shira Geffen, who is also an actress and director and screenwriter, as well as a writer of children's books, and whose husband is Edgar Keret, which makes Nurit Geffen also the mother-in-law of one of Israel's and the world's leading literary figures. A couple of months ago, there was an episode in which they discussed loyalty. The backdrop to that discussion was the months of ongoing protests against the Israeli government's legislative agenda. Their discussion on the podcast reflected the kind of conversations happening among many, many Israelis that were unthinkable even last year at Rosh Hashanah. Whether one is loyal to a country or to its government. If there is a distinction between the country and the government, where exactly is that line drawn? At what point is your country no longer your country? And would you ever actually have to leave it? Nurit Geffen, who was only 2 or 3 years old when Israel became a state, then said, "I married the state of Israel." The wedding was Friday, May 15th, 1948. David Ben-Gurion presided over the wedding ceremony. The Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the Declaration of Independence, was my ketubah. Afterward, we all danced in the streets in celebration. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets week after week for the past 36 weeks because they feel they too are betrothed to Israel. Each Saturday night since January, they filled the streets out of a commitment to their relationship, to reaffirm and protect what that marriage is all about, to save the marriage. I think you can tell this has been on my mind for the entire year. They feel the need to save the marriage because their current government seems determined to cancel the ketubah, to rewrite the foundational vows on which their trust is based. In defiance, the people sing, they chant, they carry flags and signs that say democracy or revolution. They walk with giant copies of their ketubah, the Declaration of Independence, printed by the thousands on huge posters, projected on the sides of buildings, draped from the top of the old city walls in Jerusalem, reaching all the way down to the ground on Mount Zion, and hung down the cliffs from the top of Masada. People in droves, filled with emotion, signed their name to the scrolls on which the declaration has been printed. Just to give you a sense of the proportion of what is happening, the numbers are absolutely staggering. In terms of population percentage, the per capita equivalent of the protests in Israel would be the same as if at the smallest demonstration of about 100,000 weekly would be the equivalent of 5.5 million Americans standing in, say, Times Square. And then there have been more than several weeks when the protests were as many as 500,000 Israelis, which would be closer to 30 million people in the US. And not just once. These demonstrations have been going on for 36 weeks in a row, each Saturday night. It is absolutely without precedent. So what are the issues? What's this all about? What's going on? When the Third Jewish Commonwealth was established 75 years ago in 1948, today's modern state of Israel, the leader was not named Moses. It was David Ben-Gurion. He did not have 40 years to write up a new constitution for the nation state like Moses and God did during our desert wandering en route to the promised land so long ago. Nor did we want or need a new Torah. Ben-Gurion and the Jewish leadership who established modern Israel had about 6 months to draft the Declaration of Independence, what we call, like I said, Megillat Atzmaut, that ketubah that Nuri Geffen was talking about. And the majority of Israelis feel similarly about it, outlining what it means to be an Israeli citizen. The vision of today's Israel concentrated especially into that 13th paragraph of the Megillah is simple. I think of it as a concentrate of the values and experience of 3,000 years of Jewish history and their lessons distilled into that 13th paragraph of the Megillah, meant to guide this renewed ancient nation into contemporary and real-world manifestation, defining the foundation and the ethos of Israel's government. It reads, quote, "The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations." Based on that declaration, for the last 75 years since its founding, Israel has been governed as a Jewish and a democratic state, delicately balancing the rights and obligations of its majority and minorities in a parliamentary democracy. Now, many Israelis sense that the carpet is being pulled out from under them, and that balance is being thrown way off. As you know, here in the US, there's a balance of power between the three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. In Israel's parliamentary democracy, the executive controls the legislature, and it is only balanced by an independent judiciary. The current government, which has a slim majority of 64 seats out of 120 in the Knesset, is trying to legislate drastic changes to the balance that has been in place since Israel's founding. Its proposed judicial overhaul would do these things: allow the Knesset to override any Supreme Court decision. It would make the Attorney General and the government legal advisors into political appointees whose legal opinions are not binding on the government and who can be dismissed at will. It would change the long-established system for appointing judges so that the governing coalition controls all the appointments, thus making all the judges also into political appointees. And the government has already passed a law that strips the Supreme Court of its heretofore ability to use the clause of reasonableness to disallow a government action or appointment that is unreasonable in the extreme and damages the public. If you get the sense that the government is trying to be a law unto itself, then I explained it successfully. This is what the government itself says that it is trying to do. In their view, democracy is not the will of the people as a whole, but that the will of the majority is absolute. They thus claim that their 64 out of 120 seats in the election gives them, those of the 64 seats, the power to do whatever they want. In their view, they can change the rules of the game, as they are trying to do. Legal experts the world over, and particularly in Israel, agreed that their judicial overhaul are all the steps toward taking absolute power. It follows the playbook already used successfully in Hungary and Poland to undermine democracy. What is speculative about the judicial overhaul is the reason why the coalition members are so determined to be a law unto themselves. We don't know for sure, but surely they have a variety of motivations. For some, as anywhere, it's the universal greed for power. Possibly, another option, if you have a trial coming up or concurrently taking place, and several members of the ruling coalition do, then choosing your own judges makes sense on your legislative agenda. For others, it is an issue of anti-democratic ideology, pure and simple. The extremist settler parties in the coalition have openly vowed to undo the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza by then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, whose motivation for leaving Gaza was that in order to preserve a Jewish and a democratic Israel, we have to withdraw from ruling over mass numbers of Arabs. The contra-rationale of the extremists today, then, is the opposite equation. If we want all the land back in Israel as a Jewish state, it means withdrawing from democracy. It's absolutely fascinating, I think, to see all the signs carried by the demonstrators. They're filled with stories and psyche, identity, and culture of the people of Israel. Quote, these are some of the signs. We didn't walk 40 years in the desert for this. My parents didn't make Aliyah from the Soviet Union to live in a dictatorship, says another sign. Another sign states, we didn't leave Morocco for another king. And another sign reads, it's a good thing my grandparents are no longer alive to see history repeat itself. I think the signs held by bereaved families are particularly heartbreaking. They come to the protest holding photos of their beloved son or daughter, sibling or parent who was killed defending Israel, holding signs such as, with their deaths, they demanded of us democracy. They sacrificed their lives for a Jewish and a democratic Israel. And was their sacrifice for nothing? Incredibly, a group of retired commandos who served under the command of Yoni Netanyahu, who led the raid on Entebbe in 1976, in which Netanyahu was killed. They got a replica of the Mercedes convertible so famously used to trick the hijackers in Uganda in that raid to successfully rescue the people. They drove it to Jerusalem to get Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attention, who is Yoni's youngest brother. They wanted to tell him that they risked their lives in the name of a democratic Israel, as did his brother, who died in that mission. And now they are standing for Israel's democracy. Signs recalling history are particularly alarming, as well as informative. Quotes from the prophets, such as this one from one of the demonstrations this summer. I showed this before on the Shabbat. Emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sharechem, from the prophet Zechariah. Truth and a judgment of peace will be the judgments in your gates. Other quotes warning against injustice and corruption are ubiquitous signs, as well as about the essential need for impartial judges. There are signs reminding us that we've been here before. on the verge of a civil war, God forbid. I think there is a real fear, as many signs say, that this government is nothing short of Mamshelet Chorban Habayit, a government of Chorban Habayit, a reference to the two temples in Jerusalem that were destroyed, first by the Babylonians and then by the Romans. Literally, it translates as a government of a destruction of home. Now, I have to admit that I share these fears, sadly, even as I look for the positive in what is going on, which I will get to. Not only are Israelis taking out foreign passports, moving money out of the country, have seen investments in the country decrease by over 60% since January when this crisis started. The shekel dramatically weakened since then, the military weakened. But the greatest concern at the moment is that a constitutional crisis is a very real possibility. What will happen if the High Court, Israel's Supreme Court, rules that that new law against the court's use of the reasonableness clause is itself unreasonable and therefore invalid? And the government refuses to abide by the court's ruling. And several ministers have stated that the government would refuse to abide by such a ruling. And the prime minister has refused to say that he would abide by the court's ruling. What happens in that situation when the police and the army are called upon to enforce which? The court's ruling or the government's instruction? In fact, a special hearing took place this past Monday on the reasonableness law. All 15 High Court justices sat for the hearing, the first time ever in Israeli history that the entire court has been convened. The Attorney General, who's supposed to represent the government, refused to represent the government's position because she found it to be completely legally indefensible. The government hired a private lawyer. A key part of the lawyer's argument was that the Israeli Declaration of Independence does not have legal bearing and therefore does not empower the courts to force the government to fulfill the vision detailed there that I read before, including the protection of norms that preserve Israel as a democracy. He said, furthermore, that the declaration was only Ben-Gurion and 37 other people signing it. Who empowered them to decide for us today what our values and vision of Israel needs to be? We've been here before. Tradition tells us that the first temple was destroyed because of immorality. The second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, causeless hatred of one Jew for another. I'm guessing that you, like me and most of Am Yisrael, see the miracle of the modern state of Israel as a form of redemption, a kind of a third temple of sorts. After 2,000 years of exile, the establishment of the modern state of Israel really was no less than a miracle, the fulfillment of a dream. The protesters in the streets speak of the dreams that brought them, their parents or grandparents, to Israel. The dream of a state that is both Jewish and democratic. The dream of Israel as a source of unity for the Jewish people, which it mostly has been for generations of Zionists until today. It's Israel's Megillat Atzmaut that translated that dream into a reality around which the entire people of Israel could and have and continue to be a proud part of, a light unto the nations, a light unto ourselves. This is the dream that led to my own Aliyah to Israel nearly 30 years ago. And that led to my wife Tamar's parents moving to Israel in 1972, and her dad fighting and being wounded in a war. Along with dreams, though, there has to be hope. Hatikva, there must be hope. And there is hope. Almost 2,200 years ago, the Maccabees fought for religious freedom when it was imperiled by the Seleucid Greeks. The Maccabees' victory brought 100 more years of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. The temple was rededicated, and we could once again learn Torah, live Jewishly, free in our own country. But it didn't take long. Very quickly, the Maccabee leaders became corrupt, forgetting what they had fought for. They became what they had fought against. They became Roman puppets until the Romans overtook them. The mitzvah of Hanukkah that we celebrate as modern Jews, and I know you're all familiar with it, carries this crucial lesson. The mitzvah is the actual act of igniting the Hanukkah lights. It is meant to remind us that which lit the fire to begin with, the dream and the vision that sparked the rebellion to preserve our Jewish country then. So often in life, we forget the vision of what sparked the fire, whether it be the leaders of the revolutions who later become what they fought against, or in relationships where the day-to-day routine over time masks what is essential and the partners say the spark has gone out. The hope is this, and the masses of protesters say this loudly in the streets: we have woken up, we have that spark. The threat to our democracy ignited that spark once again. It reminded us what the dream and the hope of modern Israel was all about to begin with. It caused us to reread our ketubah with Israel and frame it on the wall. To sign it again in a renewal of our vows. Fighting for democracy rekindled the hope as we took back the flag to clarify what our dream and our vision is. It gives us the level of prayer for kavanah, intention, when we sing with one voice in our hundreds of thousands, the Hatikva, the hope, our national anthem. And it has unified us and reminded us how important it is to be part of Am Yisrael, the people Israel. At a demonstration I was at, just seeing the sea of flags, I shared this story earlier, a couple weeks ago. All you can see is flags. Absolutely one voice. Everyone sings the words to Hatikva. In one of those pauses right before the end, my friend Barak Zemmer turned to me and says, I love this people, Israel. Emily sang our prayer for Israel so beautifully. I want to conclude with the words in English for us. Avinu Shebashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it your shelter of peace, guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. Let us say,